It was one of those crisp spring mornings where everything feels just a little too perfect. Sun filtering through the trees, kids riding scooters down the sidewalks, and birds chirping like some kind of Disney montage. I was inside, sipping coffee and watching my daughter Lily press her nose against the window. She was absolutely mesmerized by the finches flitting around the little wooden bird feeder we had hung from the tree out front. The feeder was a simple thing, a tiny wooden house we bought for $10 at the garden store. Lily had painted it herself with purple flowers and one crooked yellow sun. She named it the Birdie Cafe and insisted on checking it every morning to see if any customers had arrived. It was innocent, sweet, the kind of thing you'd think would make a neighborhood feel more alive, not less. So you can imagine my confusion when I opened the front door and saw that envelope. Bright yellow, glaringly official. It was taped to the glass like a slap in the face. At first I thought maybe it was a package delivery notice. Then I saw the words, "Notice of Violation," printed in bold, all-caps letters that could fry. An egg. My stomach dropped. The letter was from the neighborhood association. Well, more specifically from Karen. Her name was stamped at the bottom like some kind of dictator's seal. It read like this: "You are hereby notified that you are in violation of Neighborhood Code 14.3c regarding wildlife attractants. Specifically, an unauthorized bird feeder has been placed in front of your property, drawing excessive wildlife activity and posing potential disruption to the local residential ecosystem. You are to remove said feeder within 48 hours or be subject to a $50 fine." I read it twice, then 3 more times, because it sounded like I had erected a moose sanctuary, not hung a 2-pound birdhouse for my daughter's amusement. Excessive wildlife. I muttered out loud, flipping the letter over, as if there might be some fine print that explained the absurdity. Nope. Just Karen's signature, neatly typed, and a timestamp from the night before. That woman must have been watching me from behind her blinds. I could picture it perfectly. Her standing there, eyes narrowed behind her lace curtains, pen poised and ready like a courtroom stenographer. Probably writing the complaint before I'd even filled the feeder. Karen had a reputation around the neighborhood. She was president of the HOA and treated the position like she was running the Pentagon. She once threatened to fine the Millers down the street for having an inflatable Santa that violated seasonal decor standards because they put it up 2 days after New Year's. She made Mr. Patel repaint his front door twice because the first shade of blue wasn't community approved, and now, apparently, she had declared war on birds. I stood on my porch, clutching the letter when I saw her. Across the street. Karen. Standing like a general in her rose garden, pruning shears in one hand, a Starbucks in the other, her eyes covered by oversized sunglasses that did nothing to hide her smug posture. She didn't wave. Just gave me a tiny nod. I see you, feeder criminal, kind of nod. Back inside, Lily was sitting on the couch with her sketchbook, drawing what looked like a chubby little sparrow. She looked up at me with that hopeful smile of hers. "Are we putting out more birdseed today?" I opened my mouth, then stopped. How was I supposed to tell my daughter that we were being fined for feeding birds? That some grown woman with a personal vendetta against happiness had reported us? "Not today, honey," I said carefully. "The birds might need a little break." Her face fell. Not dramatically, just that quiet disappointment kids get when something magical is taken away, and they don't quite understand why. She didn't ask questions. She just went back to her drawing. Later that day, I took the feeder down. I stood there, hands on the rough bark of the tree, undoing the little rope loop Lily had tied so proudly last weekend. It felt like giving in. Like folding to some ridiculous authority I never agreed to. But I didn't have the energy for a fight. Not yet. As I set the feeder down on our porch table, I felt something shift. A flicker of stubbornness, maybe. Or the faint glimmer of a plan. Because the thing was, Karen had poked the wrong bear. She thought she'd won with her envelope and her code 14.3 whatever. She thought she could slap a rule on something small and sweet and make it disappear. But I wasn't ready to let her get comfortable, not just yet. I glanced back across the street. She was gone now, probably inside drafting another letter or polishing her garden gnomes. Her house looked like it always did, pristine, perfect, soulless, not a single leaf out of place. But I knew something she didn't. Real life doesn't fit into neat little rules. Sometimes it has feathers, and sometimes it comes with claws. I smiled to myself. Because if Karen thought the worst thing to come from that tree was a hungry bird, she clearly hadn't seen what karma had in store for her next. 2 days after the bird feeder incident, I was still stewing. Every time I looked at the bare branch, where the birdie cafe used to hang, I felt a dull little ache in my chest. Not rage, just one of those quiet, simmering feelings that comes from being wronged in a way that's too petty to shout about but too irritating to forget. I was dragging our garbage can to the curb when I saw movement in the hedges across the street. At first, I thought it might be one of the neighborhood rabbits, but then something orange and fluffy darted out and tore across Mrs. Dalton's yard like it had a vendetta against tulips. I squinted. It was a cat, a very large cat, a very familiar cat, Mr. Whiskers, Karen's pride and joy, a monstrous Maine Coon with silky fur, a tail like a feather boa, and an attitude that screamed royalty. I had seen her walk him before, yes, walk him, with a tiny harness and leash like he was a tiny judgmental dog. But this time, no leash, no Karen, just a full-on feline jailbreak. The moment I recognized him, I froze. And then I did something I'm not proud of. I laughed, out loud, not a cackle, not a belly laugh, more of a wicked little chuckle that bubbled out before I could stop it. Because this was gold. The great enforcer of neighborhood rules had lost control of her fur child. And not just lost, completely lost. That cat was moving like it had places to be, people to ignore, and plants to destroy. I watched as Whiskers disappeared into the hedgerow between the miller's house and the fence line. I could only imagine the chaos that cat could cause if left to his own devices. He was big enough to spook a small dog, and smug enough to do it on purpose. I turned back toward the house, still grinning, when my doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Karen. Her usually polished appearance was unraveling. She wore a robe, and her hair was pulled into a hasty bun that had clearly not survived her morning panic. Her cheeks were flushed, and she clutched a bag of Temptations cat treats like it was a defibrillator. "Have you seen Whiskers?" she blurted out, skipping any pleasantries. Her tone wasn't accusatory yet, but I could feel the storm gathering behind her eyes. I blinked, blinking hard so I wouldn't smirk. "Whiskers?" I repeated, as if the name meant nothing to me. "Yes, my cat," she said, her voice tight, with worry, panic bleeding through her usual crisp authority. "He got out about 20 minutes ago. He doesn't normally, he saw a squirrel and slipped out of his harness. I've checked the usual spots, but he's gone." I leaned on the doorframe casually. "That's so strange. Cats usually don't just bolt like that, unless, of course, something attracted him." Karen blinked. "Maybe there was some excessive wildlife activity in the area," I added, tapping my chin. "You know, squirrels, chipmunks, birds, bird feeders even." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I don't have time for games," she said, but her voice lacked its usual steel. "If you see him, please let me know." "Of course," I said sweetly. "Wouldn't want any unregulated animal behavior in our neighborhood." She didn't respond, just turned and marched down the steps, calling Whiskers' name in a pitch that probably scared off every creature within a 2-block radius. I watched her go, then stepped outside and took a deep breath. The day had taken a sharp turn in my favor. Later that afternoon, while Lily was napping and I was folding laundry by the window. I saw something move on the back deck. There, nestled beneath the slats of our deck stairs, was a familiar orange tail, Mr. Whiskers. He was curled up in the shade, looking thoroughly unimpressed with the world and covered in twigs. His majestic fluff now had patches of dust and leaves, and his once dignified tail flicked with mild irritation. I quietly opened the sliding door and crouched down. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. "Big day out?" Whiskers looked at me like I owed him rent but didn't move. He was clearly tired and hungry. I went inside, popped open a can of tuna and returned. That did it. In 5 seconds flat, the escape artist strolled into my laundry room like he owned it and began licking the bowl with gusto. As I watched him, an idea began to form. I didn't hate Karen. I didn't even really dislike her. But this was too good. She'd embarrassed me over a bird feeder, made my daughter cry, all while parading her oversized cat around on a leash like a status symbol. And now, that very symbol was purring contentedly in my house, chewing through tuna I had paid for. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was balance, justice, a little poetic symmetry. So I printed a sign, big, bold font. Bird feeder. Fine. $50. Return. Of cat free, with apology. I stuck it in the front yard right by the sidewalk next to the tree where the feeder had once hung, and then I waited. It didn't take long. Karen returned around an hour later, looking even more frazzled than before. Her eyes darted from house to house until they landed on the sign. She stopped mid-stride, stared for a solid 10 seconds, and then looked up toward our porch like it might spit fire. I opened the door before she could knock. Whiskers was at my feet, having just finished his tuna and now grooming himself with the quiet grace of someone who knew they were the center of attention. Karen looked at him, then at me, then at the sign. I may have been a bit harsh about the feeder, she said stiffly, the words tasting like vinegar. Whiskers gets excited by birds, you see. I nodded slowly. Understandable. They're fascinating creatures, peaceful, charming, almost like they belong in a neighborhood. She didn't smile, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. "Barely. May I?" she asked, gesturing to the cat. I stepped aside, and Whiskers trotted out without hesitation, tail high, like he had spent the day on a personal retreat. Karen scooped him up and turned without another word. As she walked away, I called after her. "Let me know if he ever wants to come back. We've got more tuna, and we might even reopen the Birdie Cafe." She didn't respond, but I could swear. I saw her shoulders shake with a silent chuckle. Maybe. Hard to tell. Either way, something had shifted. The playing field had been leveled. And the real fun was just beginning. The moment the door closed behind Karen and her freshly retrieved feline, I stood there for a minute, just letting it all soak in. Whiskers had strutted out of my house like royalty returning from exile, and Karen, the queen of HOA memos, had actually muttered what might have been a half apology. It wasn't much, but it was a start. More than I ever thought I'd get from someone who once filed a complaint over someone else's Halloween decorations being unseasonably grotesque. But even as I stood there, basking in the glow of poetic justice, I couldn't stop thinking about the absurdity of the situation. My daughter had been denied the simple joy of feeding birds because of one woman's obsession with rules and order. And now that same woman's cat had not only violated her own standards, but ended up on my turf, eating my tuna, sleeping under my deck like he paid rent. I sat down on the porch steps and looked at the empty hook on the tree where the bird feeder used to hang. Lily had been devastated when I took it down. She'd tried to hide it, but I saw her checking the tree every morning afterward, her face falling a little more each time. She was only 6, but she understood that something happy had been taken from her, something small but meaningful. And yet, even in that frustration, something had changed. Something small, but real. Karen had come to me for help. She had seen me, not as the neighborhood nuisance or rule breaker, but as the person who could fix her problem. I hadn't gloated. Not really. I hadn't made her beg or parade through the streets or write me a formal apology in triplicate. I could have. Maybe I wanted to. But instead, I offered her a little sign and a little sarcasm. And in return, she offered something that almost looked like humility. Later that evening, Lily wandered into the kitchen while I was cleaning up dinner. "Is the Birdie Cafe ever coming back?" she asked softly, eyes round and hopeful. I paused, drying my hands on a dish towel. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe soon." She nodded, then tilted her head. "Do you think the birds are sad?" That one hit me. I knelt down in front of her and brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. "I think the birds are patient, and they probably know they'll have a place again someday." She smiled. "Okay." That night, I sat out on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the shadows lengthen across the street. Karen's house was lit up like usual, every window glowing with symmetrical light, the porch perfectly tidy. But the blinds were opened for once, and I could see her sitting inside, cradling Whiskers on her lap, while she scrolled through something on her tablet. It was a strange thing, watching her like that. Not as the stern enforcer, not as the clipboard-carrying HOA president, but as a woman sitting quietly with her cat, trying to unwind from a day that probably hadn't gone at all how she planned. I couldn't help but wonder what had made her like this, so rigid, so obsessed with order. Maybe she had lost something once. Maybe she thought rules were the only way to keep the chaos at bay. The next morning, I found a little envelope on our porch. It wasn't bright yellow this time, just a plain white card with a little K embossed on the front. Inside, a handwritten note. "Thank you for watching over Whiskers. I'm sorry about the bird feeder. I may have overreacted. I hope this can make things right." And beneath that, a gift card to the local garden store with a sticky note. "For the Birdie Cafe, if you decide to reopen." I read it twice. Then again. My eyebrows went up. Karen had handwritten an apology. She hadn't just typed it out, hadn't filled out a formal form or cited a rule. She'd written it, signed it, and left it at my door like a peace offering. Lily found the note a little later. She squealed when she saw the gift card, then grabbed her crayons and immediately began sketching a new sign. Birdie Cafe 2.0. Now even better, with little sparkles and birds wearing top hats. We went to the garden store that afternoon. She picked out a fancy new feeder, one shaped like a little cottage, complete with tiny shutters and a miniature shingled roof. We bought extra seed and even a hummingbird feeder for good measure. By the time the sun was setting, our tree had its new ornament. The birds returned within the hour. First the finches, then a cardinal, and even a blue jay who seemed mildly offended by the decor but stayed anyway, and something even stranger happened after that. Around dusk, Whiskers returned too. He trotted into the yard, tail high, and settled on the grass like he was supervising the reopening ceremony. Lily giggled and waved at him through the window. He blinked slowly, like he approved of her upgrades. Stepped outside and sat on the steps again, sipping tea this time. Across the street, Karen was out watering her roses. She looked over, caught my eye, and did something I'd never seen before. She smiled. Not a tight, polite HOA smile. A real one. Warm. She called out, just loud enough to carry, "The feeder." "Looks great. Thanks," I replied. "We had to pass an inspection first." She actually laughed. A short, soft laugh, but real nonetheless. Then she added, "Let me know if you ever need help keeping the squirrels out. I have some tricks." I gave her a thumbs up, and she returned to her roses. And just like that, the weird tension that had wrapped itself around our little corner of the world seemed to loosen. Karen didn't magically become my best friend, and I didn't turn into a model HOA citizen overnight. But there was something new between us, something that looked suspiciously like understanding. Maybe even respect. Whiskers came back again the next day. He didn't run off this time, just lounged near the bird feeder, watching the birds with detached curiosity. And Karen? She started nodding when we passed each other on the sidewalk. Sometimes even a good morning. Funny how things change. One day you're being fined for feeding finches, and the next you're accepting a garden store gift card from the woman who wrote the fine, and all because a cat got loose chasing a squirrel. A week passed, and the birdie cafe was in full swing again. Our front yard was a lively stage, wings fluttering like leaves in the breeze, feathers catching sunlight like bits of sky. Lily took her job as cafe manager very seriously. Every morning she would check the seed levels, wipe off the tiny ledges with a damp paper towel, and announce the specials of the day to an audience of chirping sparrows. But the most unexpected regular customer wasn't even a bird. It was Whiskers. Every morning around 8 a.m., like clockwork, he strolled across the street, tail up like a little orange flag, and settled beneath the tree. He didn't stalk the birds, he just observed. As if watching the feeder had become part of his own meditative routine. Sometimes Lily would sit nearby, a few feet away, whispering stories to him while he flicked his tail and pretended not to listen. But I saw the way he leaned toward her voice, the same way he waited patiently for her to pour water into a saucer she left out just for him. He had become something like our unofficial mascot, and to my surprise, Karen didn't seem to mind. In fact, Karen seemed to be going through a transformation of her own. One afternoon, while I was trimming the hedges, she crossed the street with a tin of homemade shortbread cookies. "I thought Lily might like these," she said, holding the tin a little awkwardly, like she wasn't quite used to giving gifts, without an accompanying warning or regulation. "That's really kind of you," I said, wiping my hands and taking the tin. "She's gonna love this." Karen looked around, her gaze settling on the tree and the feeder, where a pair of chickadees were hopping and bickering over a perch. "It's nice," she said quietly. "The birds, the sounds. I used to hate all the noise when I moved here, but I guess not all noise is bad." I blinked. Had Karen just admitted to enjoying something spontaneous, uncontrolled? Was this a crack in her armor? She glanced down and noticed Whiskers lounging on our porch swing like he paid rent. "He never used to sit with anyone but me," she said. "But now he practically lives over here." "He likes the ambiance," I replied. "Maybe it reminds him of simpler times. You know, before bird feeders were considered illegal contraband." That earned me a snort, an actual snort. Karen covered her mouth like she hadn't meant for it to happen, but it was too late. I'd heard it. She looked at me again. "You know, I never really thought about how some rules maybe don't need to be enforced so rigidly, especially the ones that keep people from being happy in small ways." I nearly dropped the cookie tin. Was this an epiphany? A personal breakthrough? Or had Whiskers been whispering wisdom into her ear while she slept? Whatever it was real. Karen had gone from HOA tyrant to reluctant neighborly ally in the span of 10 days, all because of a bird feeder and her mischievous cat. The real clincher, though, came at the next HOA meeting. I didn't normally attend those. Most people didn't, unless they were in trouble or wanted to argue about where someone's trash cans were stored. But that month, I went. Maybe I wanted to make sure the Birdie Cafe wasn't going to make another surprise appearance on the agenda. Maybe I just wanted to see if Karen would pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The meeting started as usual. Boring updates, a reminder about lawn maintenance, the announcement of a new mulch supplier that made 3 people actually cheer, go figure. Then Karen stood up at the front of the community room, holding a clipboard that she barely even looked at. "There's one more thing," she said. "I want to address a recent misunderstanding. There was a situation involving a bird feeder and a violation notice. A few heads turned in my direction. I tried not to smirk." Karen cleared her throat. "Upon further reflection, I believe the rule about wildlife attractants was applied too broadly. Going forward, bird feeders, so long as they are maintained and don't cause significant nuisance, will be allowed." She looked up. "We want our neighborhood to feel alive, and sometimes that means letting the birds in." There was a pause, a few nods, one clap, then two. Then the room broke into a smattering of applause, and for once, it wasn't the kind of grudging clapping you hear at mandatory announcements. It was real. After the meeting, Karen approached me near the coffee table where someone had brought store-bought muffins. She looked a little flustered, like she wasn't quite sure how to stand around in her own skin without her usual armor. "I meant it," she said. "What I said in there." "I know," I replied. "And I meant it when I said your cat might be an agent of chaos," she smiled again. "A real one this time." "He is. But maybe that's what I needed." We stood there for a moment, two women who had started as neighbors in the coldest sense and somehow ended up as co-conspirators in the neighborhood's tiniest revolution. Back home, Lily was waiting for me on the porch with a juice box and her sketchbook. She showed me her latest masterpiece, the Birdie Cafe, complete with a squirrel waiter, a cat lounging in a hammock, and me behind the counter serving sunflower seeds. "You gave me whiskers," I said, laughing, "because you're part of the cafe too," she said simply. "Everyone is." And maybe she was right. Maybe in some strange way the whole neighborhood was part of it now. The birds, the cat, the kid, the exasperated mom, and the woman who used to be the enforcer of the rules. That evening I poured myself a glass of wine and sat outside, watching the light fade over the rooftops. Whiskers was back in his spot under the tree. Karen was watering her roses again. Somewhere nearby, a hummingbird zipped by like a streak of sunlight, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt perfectly out of control in the best possible way. A little bird feeder had started all this. A cat had made it inevitable, and a neighborhood, mine, was better because of both.